Well, welcome everybody to 2018. This is the CHEK blog. I am James Phelps with the CHEK Institute, and I'm here with Jator Pierre, CHEK faculty member, founder, and owner of WeHLC. Welcome to the future, Jator.
You know, I really enjoy that. So since we're in the future,
Yes.
I was kind of feeling into it. Well, could I pull off pink in 2018? So pink's my new color for 2000, or maybe it's salmon-ish pink.
Yeah, it's your
Pulling it off
signature
for the
color.
future look.
Yeah. There's a song, isn't there? Pink is my signature color. I think there is.
Yeah, so pink is pink for me is, this video seems to be maybe the antithesis of many things. So
Mm.
as a kind of social cultural perspective, boys are raised in blue and girls are raised in pink.
Yeah.
And because I experience myself to be quite polar opposite at times to a lot of values, I
Mm.
thought I'd wear pink today to represent uh, my defiant side as well as my big, deep feminine side that I also carry.
Well, those are all great goals, including wearing more pink, I guess. And that's what we're going to talk to about today because this is the time of year, right? Beginning of every year when the tradition is you make a resolution. You set some sort of goal for yourself for 2018. And I do like to talk to you about these sort of cultural traditions we have because, as you noted, as we note probably in the beginning of every video interview we talk about, you always have a completely like a 90-degree take from what everybody else is doing. So this is great, and I appreciate that. So you're going to talk about today what we were talking about off camera, what we are calling sort of the anti-resolution.
Yeah, the anti-resolution. I've been sitting with because I have values of my own. Obviously, some of them are kind of polar opposite.
Yeah.
Maybe not obvious, but maybe they're obvious now. But exploring this time of year from a social culture perspective and all of these ideas that start to kind of bubble up around, okay, 2017's over, 2018's coming, and what do I want my dream, my vision, my purpose, or my goal to be, or goals to be for 2018? And I was sitting with that, and this thought bubbled up inside of me, which was, is there anything that we go after in life from a goal perspective, a vision perspective, a dream perspective? Are any of those not driven by our inferiority complex, by our fear that we're not enough, that we're not producing enough, that we're not seen enough? That we're not beautiful enough, that we're not smart enough, that we don't have enough money in the bank, that our business isn't where it should be. And kind of that perspective of how that drives, at least in my perspective, a lot of our desires and our wants in terms of creation. This video is kind of, can we do the anti of that? Not to discount that part isn't purposeful, and also not to say that that can't be a beautiful driver. I think there's a light and a shadow side to everything. So what I like to do at times is just kind of turn the shadow onto the typical and then look at the light of another way of doing it, as well as look at the shadow of another way of doing it. So here is the invitation is maybe for not just 2018, but since we're talking about goals, for 2018, we're going to plaster that on there, but maybe as well of 2018, just simply on a daily basis. What if you started to be more accepting and allowing and celebratory of who you are today, not who you are going to be tomorrow, and also celebrating who you've been? And maybe taking a year to take a step back and be yin about things. Instead of being so yang all the time, maybe there's a larger balance of what would it be like to have a year of yinness, where you're enjoying this word that I think has a negative connotation attached to it, at least in our socio-cultural ideals in the West. And I think that idea is satisfaction. It almost has this negative feel to it, at least when I hear other people talk about it. Oh, if you're satisfied, you're essentially apathetic. And I've been playing a lot with this idea of allowing myself to be satisfied with where I am at today, to enjoy all of the co-creations that I've co-created to this point in my life, and to really sit back and celebrate who I am today, my experiences of myself today, rather than, okay, well, I have to do more. I'm not lean enough this year, so I got to be leaner next year. I didn't, make enough last year, so I got to make more next year. And where I started to notice that in my own life is, as a trend, I've been making more financial money over the years, and I made a nice chunk of change the last 3 years where I was like thinking, man, you've made it, Jator, right? Whatever that means. And I noticed that number was satisfactory for about a moment, and became unsatisfactory of, okay, well, what am I going to accomplish next? And what I find really fascinating about that is my experience of how the ego or our ego parts kind of create control and the illusion of having a lot of need to be is through this idea of relative. It's all relative. So as soon as we have accomplished one thing, that's now the bar, so we have to accomplish more. Maybe said in another way, if we look into a basket of fruit, we're immediately going to look for the rotten fruit, or we're going to look for the fruit with a worm in it. It's less likely we're going to enjoy the beauty of all the fruit that's there, the perfect fruits. And that's kind of driven by this ancestral or survival lens that we had to look for negativity in our environment so that we could survive. We had to look for the saber-toothed tiger. We had to look for the traps. We had to look for the signs where other tribes may be hiding and lurking, because we were in this survival place. And that mechanism still plays out for me in our goal setting. It plays out in our 2018. Well, I'm in this lacking mentality, and I have to produce more and more. It's never enough, because we can never fill the void of the the black hole that resides within many of us that can never be filled. So we continue to try to fill that. We continue to try to elicit external validation, because most of us were consistently and constantly looking for external validation as children. We do that as adults, and fewer of us, at least in my experience, have the ability to internally validate, internally inspire, and internally be satisfied with who we are, not for our human doings, but for our being, who we be, says in another way.
Yeah. And so I imagine that if you are a person who has come to some level of happiness or acceptance of who you are, versus somebody who isn't, those end up taking you in very different directions in life and having you set very different short-term goals in life.
Yeah, you know, what's really interesting about this, from my perspective, kind of to draft off of what you shared,
Mm.
is that that inferiority complex, or that lacking, or that fear, as a paradox, can actually be a very strong driver.
Mm.
It can create I don't know, the guy that the guy that made Apple. It can create,
Mm.
people like
Yeah.
that. It can create, amazing
Mm-hmm.
companies, an amazing production, amazing amounts of financial ability.
Mm.
But my question is, what's underneath that, and then
Yeah.
what's the long-term outcome of those?
Mm.
So for some people, that can become an amazing driver. We've talked
Mm-hmm.
about Eminem before. So
Mm.
Eminem used his internal mechanisms in his childhood, and some of his friends who saw things differently.
Mm.
He used them as a metaphor to change his perception and use
Yeah.
his handicaps as his assets, which is
Mm.
a line from one of his last songs, which I really appreciate him.
Yeah.
And then we have, the flip side of that. Then we have the other side of the people who go into apathy when those things
Right.
happen and become the victim of their circumstances and a victim of their external environments,
Yeah.
and say, well, that's what holds me down. So you have these kind of two opposite polarities of the same kind of root, which
Mm-hmm.
is this inferiority complex, that is my experience, all human beings have in different shades of gray.
Yeah.
How much, how you can kind of get in contact with some of that is ask yourself questions like, excuse me, how much do you notice that you compete and compare with the outside world? A lot of people might have not be able to feel that much, but if you really sit with that, how much do you compete and compare with uh, someone that you put up on a pedestal?
Mm.
As an example, JP is a good friend of mine, so we're close, as well as I notice that there's a part of me that competes with JP
Mm.
and compares myself to JP.
Mm-hmm.
So if a video that I produce gets 2,800 clicks,
Mm.
for me, for a part of me, that's a celebratory moment.
Mm-hmm.
Until I compare myself to JP.
Right.
And then I say, well, he's got 8 million clicks.
Well, I tell you what. Then the next video we do is going to be one of you prancercising in the woods.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating piece to start to explore in yourself, is how much of what you do is driven by competing and comparing with the outside world.
Yeah.
How much of what you're doing is also pedestaling other people, as well as putting other people down so you can put yourself up.
Yeah.
And how much of that is driven by, this inferiority complex, or not feeling like enough? Can we start to invite ourselves in 2018 maybe to start to notice those behaviors? Wow, I compete and compare with my best friend. That's really interesting. And JP and I have conversations about how we compete and compare, because it's a fascinating exploration, which helps us learn about ourselves in the presence of each other, as well as creates more intimacy in our relationship because it's real.
Right. So what I want to go back to talking about this idea of apathy and acceptance, right? Because I can hear somebody say, well, accepting yourself sounds great, but it's like saying, is it like saying, well, it is what it is, right? Which is one of my least favorite expressions ever, right? But it's this idea that acceptance means how do I guess giving up. It means not doing anything more about the challenges that you face, not doing anything more about becoming your best you, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, because I think it feels like a really fine line.
Mm. Yeah.
It also feels, it feels driven by, how, so what we do here is we try to make blanket statements.
Yeah.
Unfortunately and or fortunately, there aren't blanket statements. So the idea of acceptance
Yeah.
is going to be interpreted by the 8 billion people on planet or wherever we're at, all in different ways.
Mm.
Some people are going to interpret that as apathetic,
Mm.
giving up.
Yeah.
I guess it is what it is. That, for me, is a statement of apathy.
Yeah.
For me, the difference between acceptance and apathy is one in the eye of the beholder.
Mm.
So me.
Yeah.
And so for me, in my eyes, apathy would be naivety.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be giving up my innocence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm naive because I know there's something to be explored, but I'm not going to explore it.
Mm.
Whereas innocence for me is, I know there's something to explore and I want to explore it.
Mm. Mm.
So for me, those two are very different ways of navigating life. So when I say acceptance, for me, it means, can I take a moment or moments or a year to enjoy the fruits of my past labor?
Mm. Mm.
Can I, if I was a farmer, at the end of the season when I've produced my crop and I've sold that and I've made the money that I need to make off of that, and I've taken care of the soil and I've taken care of the microorganisms, back to like our soil of self,
Mm.
I've taken care of or co-cared with my family, and we all played our roles in that. This is all
Mm.
kind of maybe a metaphor for all the aspects of
Mm-hmm.
Jator. Can I enjoy that?
Yeah.
Rather than shame that as not enough and then say I have to produce more next year.
Mm.
There's a paradox to that for me, and that is kind of this social cultural idea of more is always better.
Mm.
Production always needs to grow.
Mm.
How many times have we seen companies that make a very beautiful singular product,
Mm.
and that product is celebrated?
Mm.
Then that company starts to grow, and then as they're growing, we need to expand. We need to make more product. We need to sell more things so we can keep growing.
Mm.
And then the quality of that kind starts to dwindle.
Mm.
Not all companies does that happen to, but some of them.
Mm.
So what I'm saying here is, how do we enjoy what our creations are rather than shaming ourselves into producing more?
Mm. Mm.
And that would be acceptance.
Mm.
So as another example for me, some people might say that, well, Jator, you're an overachiever. And that might be from some people's perspectives.
Mm.
And from my perspective, yeah, that's probably true in a lot of sense.
Mm.
So I've noticed, because of that overachiever based on my insecurities of needing to prove myself to the outside world that I am enough, so I can eventually maybe find some semblance of being enough internally.
Yeah.
I would, no matter what the goal was, no matter what was achieved, it was never enough. So I was this hamster on the wheel. And the paradox is, when we look at things like something like sleep. So you look at sleep, and when you get a good night's sleep, the next day you actually are more efficient. Mm. The less sleep that you get, the next day you're actually more inefficient, from a mental and emotional space, from a get things done space, from a efficient space of being able to create. Mm-hmm. So this is the same concept, just broader. And that broadness is, if you're always producing and not sleeping, inevitably your efficiency will start to dwindle at some point. So what I'm inviting people to do is, instead of pushing so hard, at times it's also can be very beneficial to pull, because that can springboard you forward. What if I said the paradox of accepting, allowing, celebrating rather than criticizing. What if I said the paradox is that you will actually produce more? And that is something that's very hard for a logical mind to understand. If you mean if I do less, I might actually produce more. But when you look at research around work, when you look at research around sleep and efficiency, the more that we can focus in on something for specific amounts of time and then give ourselves a rest, it's actually we get a rebound effect to higher levels of production. So instead of doing things this year that are so goal-driven of production and higher amounts of more, what if it's things that are more broad, like, what if I allowed myself to play more this year? What if I allowed more pleasure in my life? What if I allowed more time in nature in my life? What if I allowed more of these kind of yin concepts in my life to support my desire to create that year, another year, but to have this ebb and flow to it, which just like, we look at workouts, the periodization, it's not this linear line. We have to periodize and slowly go up. So that's kind of, for me, the difference is where apathy would be, I don't care and I don't want to change. And acceptance would be, wow, this is really cool. Look what I've created. This is beautiful. There's other things I want to do, and I'm going to put those on the back burner and let them simmer for a bit, and I'm going to enjoy what I've already created. I'm going to enjoy and have reverence for my body. Okay, my body doesn't look exactly the way I want it to look. Cool. But can you move? Yes. Can you play? Yes. Can you enjoy what you do have? And that, as a paradox, actually is a huge force to pull us in other directions softly, which I think is this compassion, empathy piece is part of this allowance and acceptance, rather than driving ourselves through criticism. How often do you notice, I notice quite frequently, that I celebrate myself through criticism more often than I celebrate myself through celebration.
And I think we have a whole virtue built around doing just that, right? And humility, right?
It's. I guess what I'm offering is, can we have a softer flow behind us? Not for everyone, and not to say the harder flow is wrong or bad. It's just that there's a different way of doing things. It doesn't always have to be this driving force that grinds you into the ground. It can be this soft, inviting, pulling force that pulls you with it.
So I guess what I think I'm hearing from you in a way is that when you are operating from that place, it almost sounds like a hunger, right, or a need, that emptiness, that need for more and more fulfillment. That there's sort of two things that can go on. One, there's an actual physical and psychological burden that you build up over time, right? It sort of grinds you down, so there's stress. But it can also lead you to make certain decisions in the long run as well that aren't particularly healthy for you or good for you. Whereas with acceptance, it sounds like there's sort of two parts to it. One, there's just the part of acknowledgement, and then there's the part where you don't beat yourself up.
It's acceptance doesn't mean being a step rug for yourself and everyone else. It essentially means feeling your feelings, being present with as much as you can of yourself, celebrating your light sides and your shadow sides, noticing your need to self-criticize, noticing your need to be compassionate and empathetic towards self, noticing your judgments of others in the outside world, noticing that might be a reflection of your judgments internally that you project outwardly.
Yeah.
And all of these explorations coming from a place of being mindful of how much criticism you put on yourself for those aspects.
Yeah.
And inviting in another perspective, which might be, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to be you. It's okay to judge. It's okay to be critical. It's okay to be joyous. It's okay to be open. It's okay to be closed. It's okay to be exactly where you're at. And it's also okay to desire change, to want change, to go after things.
Yeah.
Can we just bring more of a balanced perspective to it? There's a story that I heard, and I'm not a big fan of hearing stories because essentially the name that's associated with the story is kind of this way that we validate the truth or the legitimacy of the story. So this name is Carl Jung, who's associated with this story. So take the story as you will. But the story goes that Carl, in part of his kind of internal exploration of self, he went and met with some tribal elders, kind of ancestral tribal elders. And in his dialogues with them, they offered a perspective that he thought was very fascinating. And one of the tribal elders said to him, we're really fascinated by the Western mind and the white man. And why we're fascinated is because the way that we experience you all is like locusts. You go to an area and you devour everything. And then you look for the next area to go devour. And that's a symbol, that's symbolism too for this kind of goal-centric drive of I'm not enough. I need to go and create, devour, and then I'm like a locust. I'm looking for the next field to go devour. Rather than when we look at things from an ancestral lens, it's fascinating, as far as I'm aware, that most of our ancestors, as a symbol and as a literal, lived in harmony with nature, lived in harmony with what was around them. To do that, in my perspective, to live in harmony with what's around you, the food, the other animals, not to be a locust and go and eat everything and look for the next place. To live in harmony like that, there has to be a higher level of harmony within self. And there has to be a higher harmony within the tribe. In my perspective, almost everything that we do externally is a mirror of aspects of the internal. So these tribes had a much higher rate of satisfaction, higher rate of happiness, higher rate of support, higher rate of understanding, higher rate of compassion and empathy. And were they as technologically advanced as us? No. Did they live in rhythm with the surrounding environment and the world? Yes. Which one's better or worse? That's up to you. I am saying that it was very interesting that these ancestral tribes noticed how the Western mind is focused on always producing more, always being this locust of devouring everything around it. And when we look at the world today, what are we doing? As a whole, we are devouring this planet in every sense of that word. And we're also devouring each other, partly in my perspective, because many of us don't have the internal harmony of compassion and empathy, understanding, and being kind towards self. So we drive it. We drive it everywhere we go, and we're eating everything. Again, I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just somebody saying something to notice. And when can we use these different perspectives. When can we use that locus perspective? I'm not saying it's good or bad. There's a light and a shadow to that too. When can we use that to our advantage? And then when can we also flow or ebb to this other side of being in harmony with what we've created and soothing the system? Another kind of quick metaphor around that is when you look at Japanese sword makers, if you watch a documentary on making a sword, you'll notice that when they're grinding the sword to create the shape and the look and the heat, there's tension, there's friction. So that would be like the yang expression. But to create a beautiful Japanese samurai sword, you'll also notice that the sword creator has to take the sword off the grinding wheel. He has to take it off, and then he pours water over it and cools the sword, and then goes back to grinding. But there's a cooling period and there's a heating period, because if you just leave that sword on the grinding stone, heat, friction, tension, torque, etc., you're going to end up with a toothpick or a very dull sword.
Right. So I'm still digesting. Well, let's ask this. It sounds like, in a way, one of the contrasts between, this isn't always the case, but most New Year's resolutions are sort of an end goal. Well, I've lost X amount of weight, or I quit smoking, or whatever. They're very rarely goals in which you develop a practice. Right? And in a way, this is what you're suggesting people do, is develop a practice of acceptance. So how would you suggest to somebody who doesn't have this practice that they go about starting it?
Yeah, the first piece that I would suggest is I would take some time as the New Year's coming. If that's where you're setting your time to kind of set goals, which a lot of people do, I would take some time to create some space to really ingest where you've been and what you've done this year, or all through the past, where you're at currently, and kind of take a pulled back lens on where you're currently at. And then I'd also look at where do I feel I'm imbalanced? Do I feel like I do too much? Or do I feel like I do too little? And this is where I think that more of the individuality piece comes, because my perspective is balance is key. And balance is not static, it's dynamic. So if I'm someone that is producing all the time, burning the candles at both ends, feeling fatigued, maybe tired in terms of body, tired as well, pains, aches, etc., I would take stock of that, and my goal setting for 2018 would be this more yin based. Can I create some of these practices? One way that I do that, if I was that person, we've gone over this before, is I have a whiteboard, and I write these things down. So when I wake up in the morning, I can see them. Another option that I really love is they have this non-toxic chalkboard paint. And you can paint a whole wall in your house with this chalkboard paint. And once it dries, you have a whole blackboard. You can start to really put out ideas. So as an example, for this overproducer, let's just say I'm an overproducer, which I don't really experience myself to be. Let's just say I am. So one of my personal invitations this year is to notice what I normally don't notice, which is very hard because parts of my ego don't want me to notice what I normally don't notice, because if I notice what I normally don't notice, it's going to help me change. Because it helps me see outside of my box. So it's very fleeting all the time. It's very hard, I notice, for me to hold on to that concept. So what I did is I wrote that concept down. So I have it when I wake up, I can see it. Jator, notice what you don't notice. That becomes a practice. So for the overproducer, that might be what they need to do or want to do or invite themselves to do. Mm-hmm. Let's just say then for the flip side of that, you experience yourself as not doing enough. You have maybe an overabundance of energy. And maybe this might speak to really who I am. So I tend to probably spend majority of my time playing hockey, working out, in nature, and that's beautiful. I'm not as driven to produce kind of financial means, although I do that well as well. So maybe for me, I might need more of this push. I might need the opposite side of this. I might need more of the yang to kind of drive me forward. Okay, so I might make more of these more logical, linear-based goals. How many YouTube subscribers do I want to create in 2018? How many webinars do I want to create? How many interviews do I want to do to ultimately help me reach whatever my purpose is or my dream is? So both of those would be looking at either side of, are you already an overproducer? Maybe we need to bring you down to balance in one way. Are you, in quotes, an underproducer? Maybe we need to bring you to balance in another way. Both of those, though, come into our lives for me through the practice of awareness. So writing things down on a board, putting messages on your phone, anything that can spark your awareness of what you're trying to do or not do on a daily basis can help build that practice of being aware so that you can help facilitate that change and make it into a daily practice.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think it certainly does. I mean, like you said, if you are a person who needs to see or have structure, then having that whiteboard that you wake up to every morning, where you could just have a very simple affirmation, or just have the goal written. Today I will accept myself, or something like that. These are ways that just even seeing that as a goal or as a request, as an invocation, something like that, to start every day could be a really powerful way to at least prime yourself, right? To start, to get in that frame of mind, even if it's just for a small part of the day, even if it's just in the morning, right? And you start by just having that moment, okay, I accept myself, and then who knows what happens the rest of the day, but just getting that start is is something different than what you had been doing in the past.
And I love that saying that you just shared like, as an example. This morning, I'll accept myself. What's really fascinating about that statement is that if you say I'm going to accept myself, that means you're also going to accept when you don't accept yourself. It also means you're going to accept when you're not aware of not accepting yourself or accepting yourself.
Yeah.
So that's more driven by this idea of having compassion and empathy for self, rather than saying, I'm going to accept myself, and then I'm going to criticize myself when I'm not accepting myself. Or I'm going to criticize myself when I'm angry or rageful or depressed or anxious.
Yeah.
And we're inviting the perspective of soothing that, noticing that, and creating a practice of noticing your internal dialogue. For me, might be one of the big chunky starting points of any of this is, can you invite yourself to simply notice how you internally talk to yourself on a daily basis? If that's once a day, beautiful. If that's 0 times a day, beautiful. If that's 100 times a day, beautiful. If it's once a week, beautiful. Can you simply start to invite yourself to become aware of your internal dialogue? And that's where I got this noticing of this mantra of wanting to notice what I don't notice. I rarely notice what I want to newly notice because my body, my mind, my ego want to hide it. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And the way that it constantly comes up is when I'm having an interview or a podcast, for whatever reason, it always sparks. And then it reminds me, oh, okay, this time it reminded me again, and I'm going to write it down somewhere because that one is very elusive. So it's really being kind to yourself is just a different way to treat ourselves than we've been taught from the outside world. And that's maybe, another goal or another practice is, can you learn to be kinder to yourself, which also then bleeds into you being kinder to the outside world rather than being so critical of yourself.
Well, and I really like this because in a way it's sort of, it's not like an anti-resolution or an anti-goal, but it's more of like a meta goal or a meta resolution, right? Because one of the other things that we always hear about at this time of year is how many people don't keep their resolutions, right? How many people don't succeed at their goals? And it's some staggeringly, I forget what the number is, but it's some staggeringly large number, right? And that's, you start to ask why. And, well, maybe it's because either the choice of the goal or the reactions that we have when we kind of fall off the wagon a bit on our resolutions are driven not from this place of acceptance, but they're driven more by the place of need and the place of comparison, like you were talking about. And so then when you don't succeed at your goals, you sort of go haywire, right? There's all this judgment. There's always, and we've talked about this sort of cycle before. This sort of, oh well, you fall off, you get upset, you self-flagellate. Maybe you go through this whole rescue cycle too, and but it makes sticking with resolutions when you have a little hiccup really tough. And so I like what you're talking about because that sort of bypasses that whole kind of process and that mindset.
Yeah, I think part of what we've chatted about today is this idea of awareness is then being aware of, okay, why are you setting goals? Why why do you need to produce more? Why do you need to lose weight? What's the story underneath the story? Because if you start to explore that, it's going to widen your breadth of awareness of what's going on underneath the surface. And if most of what we do is driven by our subconscious mind, then it can serve us really well to get in touch to what's subconscious, not conscious. So if I say, I want 500 new YouTube subscribers next year, that's a conscious goal. But that's driven by something in my subconscious. So for me to really find the root of that, it would be to kind of peel back that story. What does that mean? What does that represent to me? What parts of me want to set that goal so I can fail, so I can feel guilt and shame because I have a high need to feel guilt and shame about setting goals and failing at them because I'm addicted to that process. So I love that. And this awareness piece of really being curious, why do we do what we do, can be really helpful to setting goals that may be more synergistic with your mind and your heart rather than setting apparently conscious goals that are really driven by subconscious agenda.
Well, this has been great, Jator, and I would invite that everybody who watched today try to set this practice up. Try to do the anti or the meta resolution, depending upon which you like. Because it feels to me like doing this does start you from a better place for other goals.
For me as well, it's a kinder, softer, gentler place, which in my experience of many of us, that's very needed.
Hmm. And hence your pink for
And
2018.
hence the pink.
Yes. And I think that's a great place to wrap it up.
All right.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by, Jator, and for setting us up for a great 2018. Because I feel like this was really a needed discussion about tradition that we have here. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having the salmon return to its spawning ground.
This is where you were spawned.
Yeah.
All right, folks, and on that note, thanks again, Jator. We'll
All
talk
right.
again soon.